have done. Then I want to build a channel more or less like this. Partly I will talk about something interesting from neuroscience, then something interesting from psychology or something more practical from medicine, psychiatry, neurology. All of that, everything's connected with applying knowledge about how the brain works in real life. Or to put it more accurately, I would say with a practical use of what we know about the brain function. So, and on the channel, I'll also try to give some interesting practical advices from time to time. For example, how brain function can sometimes be supported with, I don't know, vitamins or supplements or special exercises, things like that. I'm not selling anything. I am not working with any company, so I'm not promoting any drugs or pills. But I do have experience with using them as a physician. So I do have a lot of, I know how these things work in real people, and I can talk about combinations that we can use to try, like, to improve your motivation, to improve your cognition, and so on, so on, so on. Because there are a lot of supplements used, and I think the supplements for the brain are like one of the most sold, but who knows kind of what to buy. And besides, today I want to talk about one recent interesting topic. How living nerve cells can play a computer game. Probably you've heard about this. So, and after that, I will say a little about the difference between types of psychotherapy. So the first neuroscientific part will be about how the living nerve cells play in the Doom, and the other part will be about what is the difference between the psychotherapeutical techniques, especially psychoanalysis, which was invented by Sigmund Freud, analytical psychology, which was invented by Carl Jung, and the modern most used right now, I will tell why it's most used, cognitive behavioral therapy. So I'll introduce myself briefly. Actually, I think I've already have written down something, like I forgot how this thing's called, but actually you can read about me below the video. To make it short, I'm a neurologist. I was working as a practical neurologist for 10 years, treating people, and also after 5 years of practice, I've started also in the same time doing science, and last 4 years, almost 4 years, I worked in Germany. So my practical part as a neurologist, I worked in Ukraine for 10 years, and as a scientist, last 4 years I worked in Germany, working in neuroscientific lab. So actually I have a quite broad spectrum, and I'm really interested in the works of traditional psychiatrists and traditional psychoanalytical schools. Like, read plenty of books by Carl Jung or Sigmund Freud or Beck, the inventor of cognitive behavioral therapy. So kind of all this is combined, and I try to present it in the way which is interesting for the people to watch and for me to explain. So what's now? Dun, 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 dun. So let's move to the part where the neural cells play Doom. How do the cells play Doom? I think the first thing that people kind of feel about this, it's like, okay, there are neurons who are which are playing Doom, and probably there is some kind of consciousness. So the first thought, okay, probably there is a small, that's not the whole brain, that's just a couple of millions of neurons, but like the analogy works, if the whole brain is a big consciousness, maybe a little bit of neurons is a kind of a small consciousness. It doesn't work in this way, so I think there is no consciousness at all. There is no person which is locked in this game forever, like eternal doom. But I think these ideas, they really kind of are popular right now, because it's popular right now to tell that we are living in simulation, and in a way we kind of created another our simulation, like simulation in the simulation, and another simulation, and then fractal goes. It just sounds like mystically and entertaining. And I would say the people who wrote this article, not the original one by the scientist, but the people like in the popular science journals, I think they on purpose. They are leaving this kind of a space for the people to make a guess, and usually people do like interesting guesses, like say fantastic guesses, like something interesting happens. Oh. And I will try to explain how it happens. The engineering part for me is kind of a the engineering part for me is a bit complicated, and I'm not up to that. But in general, what happens in the end, the game is just a bunch of numbers. Yeah, so you can convert it to the bunch of numbers, and these numbers you can convert to signals which go to electrodes. So those signals, they go to electrodes, and those electrodes stimulate the neurons. So the neurons are there; they are just neuron cells, like bonded together, and they are firing randomly, like randomly firing always. It's the thing that the neurons do. They are firing, like it's the consequences of their being. So they're firing randomly, and also they're firing in response to stimulation, which goes from the game. And you actually can collect the information from the neurons which are firing and give it back to the game. But it's the kind of a, at first it's a random bunch of numbers. But what the scientists done, they stimulate the neurons, and then they give a feedback to the game, which is usually mostly random. But when they randomly give the pattern which is transferred to the right decision in the game, those neurons, they are reinforced. So they are stimulated with a certain frequency. So they are stimulated with a certain frequency, which is, we may say, pleasant for the neurons. Pleasant is the wrong word. Which they are stimulated in the same time with the same frequency, and there is a biological mechanism. When you are stimulating the neurons together with the same frequency, at a certain time they are binding together stronger. So this mechanism is called like firing together, wiring together, and that's the main idea. So that's what happens. They got the signal, they give the random responses, but when the random response is correct, it's kind of it's get reinforced, and the next time the probability of giving such response is higher. It's not 100% because the neurons are like, they are not binded like in a chain, they're just closer to each other. You may think about it like that. And when they are given some random stuff, they are stimulated with a chaotic noise, which actually reduces the probability of them firing the next time with this pattern. So I think I've tried to make it simple. I don't know how to make it more simple, but I think it's kind of clear. So the neuron has its activity, and this activity, if we think that there is some consciousness in this random activity of neurons, no, actually, you can say that there is some conscious in your, I don't know, left arm, for example. That's the same way. From my perspective, there is no consciousness because the reinforcement goes from not within, but outside. And there is a kind of a mechanism outside which kind of reinforces them, or kind of tries to not punishes, but give them random noise. If there would be a system which has its own system of motivation, so if they can create the neurons which have their own system of motivation, I think that would be interesting. But it's far more complicated, I think, and that's that situation when you can think about the actual consciousness. But from my perspective, we have to do a lot of work before we can have something which is like that. Which is like that. So now let's continue and talk about the which is like that. So now let's continue and talk about the techniques of psychotherapy. Yeah, I've talked about psychoanalysis. I've talked about analytical psychology, and I've talked about the most used right now is the cognitive behavioral therapy. First, about the cognitive behavioral therapy, why it's used, because actually it's can be calculated. So this method is built in a way which can be scientifically studied. And as it was scientifically studied, it was proven that it actually works. So it was proven that it can work because it gives significant results. The other methods, they are kind of usually not recommended in certain cases because there is actually no evidence, because it's almost impossible to have some evidence, because the structures which they're working with, like subconscious structures, unconscious structures, it's really hard to identify, and it's actually between the patient and the doctor, and that's a very, let's say, very specific interaction. If we're talking about cognitive behavioral therapy, how it was invented. So the author of the cognitive behavioral therapy, Beck, I think Arthur, I am not sure, sorry about the name, I should check before the stream, but his surname is Beck, I'm sure. And all those psychiatrists, they were starting with the psychoanalysis, with the method which was invented by Freud. I think in next video I'll talk about more about how it was invented. So they all started with psychoanalysis, but then on the professional way, they invented something new. Like, for example, Fritz Perls invented Gestalt therapy. Also the new thing, but